Thank you, John, for joining us today and sharing the value of wisdom for this week. I just want to ask the first question: what is, or who is, not what is, who is John? What do you get up to? What are your hobbies? What are you interested in? All sorts.
Well, my hobbies, to be honest, I don't have a lot of time for hobbies. But things that I enjoy, I've always, my whole life, enjoyed high speed.
Mm-hmm.
If I had it my way, the open road should be 140 k's an hour instead of 100. So every day I have to pull myself back in there. And I enjoy doing adventurous type things. But my biggest passion really is people. And I enjoy the different personalities, all the intricacies of the difference in humanity. It always amuses me, and keeps me interested.
So, John, this week we're exploring the value of wisdom. So I want to ask you, what do you think wisdom is? How would you classify or define what wisdom is?
Wisdom so often gets, the word wisdom so often gets mixed up with somebody with vast amounts of knowledge or discernment or different things like that. So, but actually the word wisdom, people perceive wisdom, and it's in the perception of the wisdom. All right. So actually foolishness can be perceived as wisdom by fools. Two words come into mind. When you think of wisdom, it's like aloof, or it's like stealth. All right, the wise owl watches the mice at play in the field, and he stealths in, and the other mice think, what just happened? And it's the same when someone speaks wisdom. It normally the person who's receiving the wisdom will get it. Others around might hear the same thing and think, what was that all about? You know? Yeah.
I just want to ask, has anyone really fed you wisdom, or has anyone taught you to be wise or to exercise wisdom more?
Yeah. It was once when I was probably about 12 years old. I was at a large teen gathering, and there was a guest speaker there, and he was speaking about wisdom. And he was speaking about Solomon and how God offered Solomon to have a choice of anything he wanted, but Solomon asked for wisdom. And so that night I actually did ask God, how about giving me some wisdom? Thinking I was going to get up the next day and boom, there it was. But no, it wasn't like that at all.
So, John, speaking of wisdom and this whole topic of valuing wisdom, do you think you have wisdom? Do you think you are wise?
Well, actually, no human can claim they are wise. Wisdom is something you draw in. Imagine I have like a power saw, and you ask me the question, does that power saw work? The answer is no, it doesn't. Until you either put a battery in or plug it into the power source, and then it draws on the power source. And then, yes. And it's the same with wisdom, because all true wisdom comes from God and God alone. And so we need to plug into the power source and draw on the wisdom. Wisdom isn't something you can capsulate and put in a box. It's actually something you draw on.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. And so how do you, I guess, in your everyday life, drawing from wisdom, how do you value wisdom in your everyday life?
Well, in the nature of my job, I get up in the morning and I actually don't know what's going to happen that day. And so it's very important for myself, and I'm sure all of the staff, that we actually rely on God for wisdom to give us the strength and the ability to deal with what comes our way at that day or that moment.
No, that's I would agree with you 100%. I would also like to ask, like, for anyone that is, listening that might be younger, for anyone that, is searching for wisdom, what's kind of a piece of advice that you would like to share with them that they can take away knowing? What's the one thing you would want them to know?
Well, basically, to obtain wisdom, you need to develop trust in God, knowing that He's all-powerful, knowing that nothing is beyond His capabilities. And then, once you have the relationship and the trust, you can also plug in to draw on the wisdom that only God has, the true wisdom that is available.
Well, I think that's awesome, John. And thank you very much for sharing, and thank you very much for actually valuing wisdom in the way that you do. Because you make a difference in the supported living, the way that you interact with people, the way that you live your life. You live your life valuing wisdom. And I appreciate that, and thank you for inspiring us to do the same.
Thank you.
John's at the back over there. Thank you, John, for sharing. I think it's really cool. If anyone knows John, sometimes when you talk to him, he's got like these little nuggets of wisdom that come out. And in those moments, you're like, oh, wow, okay, I didn't realize that. Or it blows your mind in some way, or it hits you a little bit later. But as we've already seen, we are going to be talking about wisdom today. And we're in our third week of our A Valuable Life series. The first week, Zal spoke to us about fun. Last week, Wes talked to us about growth. And this week, we're talking about wisdom. So I thought I would scour the internet, because, that's where all wisdom lies, for the greatest quote that I could find on wisdom. All right? Something to start us off with a great piece of wisdom. And so this is what I found. Knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is not putting it in a fruit salad. I don't know if you guys have seen that. There are trucks that have it on the side of their trucks. But I think this is a great piece of wisdom. And I think you're a genius if you just throw tomatoes out completely, right? So that's just my opinion. Now, we're talking about wisdom. And for me, if you guys know me, I sometimes am not very wise, okay? I make unwise decisions. And so I thought I'd share two stories with you about moments of when I made unwise decisions. One in the story is, it happened like last year, okay? So I'm still learning. And one happened when I was a teenager, so I was really unwise then, okay? And so the first story has to do with this. It has to do with Korean barbecue, all right? Who knows what Korean barbecue is? Yeah? Yeah? Does anyone like Korean barbecue? Yeah? No? Some people say no. I love Korean barbecue, okay? I think Korean barbecue is the best. And the Korean barbecue places I go, you can eat as much as you want, right? In a time span, otherwise we'd eat everything. But I remember one time a couple of my friends and I, we went out to this Korean barbecue place, and we sat for about 2.5 hours eating, okay? 2.5 hours. I don't know if you've ever done that, but it is unwise. It's a terrible decision. The last half an hour, we actually just sat there just going, I can't move and I can't breathe. Just letting the food settle, all right? It was super unwise. And then I regretted it later that night and earlier that morning and throughout the day, all right? Unwise decision. And the next story, I was like, I don't know, maybe 15 or 16, so my brain was still developing, okay? But we went on this whitewater rafting trip. And there was this girl there, right? And she was pretty good looking. So obviously I had like a little crush on her, right? And luckily, I actually got put in the same boat as her, in the same raft as her. I was like, yo, great. And so we were going down the river, and we were going through the rapids and all of that, and then we got stuck against a massive log, all right? And the rapid was pushing against us. We couldn't row ourselves out. And I thought in that moment, hey, I can jump onto the log and I can push the raft, and it'll be all good. In our safety briefing, they said, don't get out of the raft, especially when you're in a whitewater part, right? I didn't listen. I jumped out. I pushed the raft. I was like, I don't know, Samson or Hercules or whatever, right? In the hopes of impressing this girl. And I got the raft free. But as soon as the raft moved, I fell into the water. And then I was stuck in this rapid, and I went under the boat and came out the other side, and then the teacher had to grab me and pull me onto this raft. And so I came onto this raft expecting great applause. She wasn't impressed. And I was wet, all right? It sucked. But that was an unwise decision, or unwise decisions that I've made. And I mean, I could go on. This could just be like a comedy show if I kept going, right? But I think for some of us, we believe that in order to gain the knowledge, to put into action, to be wise, we need to make unwise decisions. I think for some of us, we really believe that. I think for a while, I believed that, right? We have to eat copious amounts of Korean barbecue meat, right, in order to know not to do it next time, right? We have to jump out of a raft to impress a girl to know that it's probably not a wise thing to do and you're putting your life in danger, right? But I believe that we don't actually have to make unwise decisions in order and go through those experiences in order to make a wise decision later on, right? That the knowledge to make wise decisions can actually be learnt without having to experience it. We can draw, like John was talking about, we can draw from different things, right? So an example of this is, I don't need to experience driving drunk in order to know that it is an unwise decision. I'm putting myself in danger, I'm putting others in danger. The wise decision would be to either call for an Uber or don't drink, right? But I think there are some myths that we believe. I think there are some myths that we face in our everyday, right? Myths that have now been around for ages, that they've actually started to become this normal style of thinking. And so I'm going to explore two of these myths. I'm sure there are tons that we can think of. But two of these myths that I believe that stop us from making wise decisions, in exercising wisdom. And so this is the first one. That wisdom is only achieved with age. And I love this because like even today, I had conversations with people that said exactly this, right? I think that this is a myth, right? And the thing is, this was my perspective for a long, long time. That I could make unwise decisions when I was young, right? And when I'm older, from all my experiences, all the unwise decisions that I have made, I can then exercise wisdom. All right? But I don't believe that this is true. Because through conversations with so many different people, and specifically with people that are older than myself, who I would expect to be wise, continue to make unwise decisions. Despite the unwise decisions that they made in their youth, despite the experiences that they've gained from all of that, they still continue to make unwise decisions. Right? And I've spoken to young people that make wise decisions right now that I can see that are laying foundations for their future. I've talked to young people that have made wise decisions in their past, and they're reaping benefits now because of foundations that they've laid. So I don't think that this myth is something that we should have in our normal thinking, right? Maybe we know people in our own lives that are like this, that they think about this, right? We assume that they're wise because they're older, but really, they're not exercising wisdom. We've heard this quote. I don't know. Maybe we have. A smart man learns from his mistakes. A wise man learns from the mistakes of others. And I would even go and say a wise man learns from the victory of others. We can exercise wisdom not just in the mistakes, but also in the victories. We can learn, right? So my thing is, can we really use this statement as an excuse? Can we really use this statement as an excuse to not exercise wisdom? I don't think we can. There's a parable that Jesus speaks of, and it's found in Luke 6. And for some of us, we've heard this, okay? And for some of us, we haven't, and that's okay, because it's going to be on the screen. But it's the parable of the wise and the foolish builders, okay? My dad used to tell me this story quite often. Obviously, I didn't learn that much, right? But I love this parable. And so, to give context, before we go into it, to give context, Jesus is healing and he's teaching and he's speaking to a large crowd. And then he's speaking specifically to his disciples. And he's talking about loving your enemies. He's talking about judging others. He's talking about all these different teachings, teaching the disciples, sharing this knowledge, right? And then he comes to this parable. And he starts off like this. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say? Right from the get-go, he's challenging his disciples. You called to me. You asked me to teach. You call me teacher. Here I am sharing my knowledge that comes from the Father, that comes from God, right? Here I am challenging you to think more than just yourself, right? To love others and to love those that hate you, but you're not really doing it. You're not really doing it. Here's not only an opportunity to gain knowledge, right? To gain knowledge without having to experience it and learn from our experiences. It's given freely. And I'm also teaching you how to put that knowledge into action so that we're making wise decisions, to live out in wisdom. So why won't you do it? This is his challenge. And I think he's not only just speaking to the disciples, I think he's speaking to us because I think this is us, right? How many of us are like this? Maybe we've been going to church for ages. Maybe we have gone to all the Bible studies, and maybe we're gaining all the knowledge. We're taking in all the session stuff and whatnot, and yet we do nothing about it, right? Maybe you don't even believe in God, right? But the same thing applies. We have the knowledge, right? Maybe we've seen people that have lived through it, right? They've lived through it, and we can see them making unwise decisions. And so we learn from that. We look at it and we go, that's not wise, right? And yet we still follow in the same footsteps. Maybe we've experienced it for ourselves. Maybe despite that experience, we're still making unwise decisions. There's a verse in John. It's super familiar. For those of us that have been following God for ages, we know this. And even if you haven't, you might know this. But it's from John 3:16, and it says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life." We have a God, all right, that sent his Son to die for us, to teach and to share knowledge, to challenge us to live in wisdom so that we may have life. So that we may have life in abundance. I don't think we have to be old in order to make wise decisions. I think where you are right now in your life, we have an opportunity every day to exercise wisdom. And so I don't think that myth is valid. I don't think we can rely and use that myth as an excuse anymore. Because we have the knowledge, and we can gain that knowledge. And actually that knowledge is given to us freely. Right? This brings me to my second myth that I believe we believe in. And this is a big one, right? I think this is actually like the biggest one. And it's this. It's the short-term gain versus the long-term foundations. I think this is this is like the juicy part of why we don't exercise wisdom. Because the reality is our culture and our world that we live in today encourages us and pushes us to value the short-term gain, the immediate gain that I can get right now over long-term foundations. Filling the wants that we want in the moment, right? Without encouraging us to really take into consideration the future. The long-term foundations that we could be setting up or that we need to set up. An example of this, all right, is pornography. Pornography is a big thing now. Access to it is super easy. You got your iPad, you got your phone, you got your computer. If you want to go old school, you got magazines, the movies that we watch. It's easy to access. And it gives us this short-term gain. Research has shown like the chemicals that are released, right? Great. It feels really good. And so we want more. And so we want more, and we want more, and we want more. And the short-term gain that we get, we get it, and we get it, and we get it, and we get it. And so then in research, it shows us that it builds these pathways. So then we need to depend on it. That short-term gain turns into a dependency without any consideration for the future. Because if research is showing us anything, the long-term effects of it, the foundations that are laid because of that, are bad. They're terrible. Marriages have ended because of this. Spouses and partners have been negatively affected by this, and it's terrible. But we want that short-term, immediate gain rather than setting up a long-term foundation, right? Because the opposite of not doing that is actually a healthy, strong relationship. Or it can be, right? You're setting yourself up for that. This is one of the few examples that I can think of. In your personal life, you might have a lot more, right? But we trade in our future, a future of life and life in abundance, a life that Jesus died for to give us because he values us so much for an immediate gain when we make unwise decisions, when we're thinking about the short term rather than the long term, right? All because we are so focused, all right, and I wrote this down, and I'm going to read it because I want us to remember this. All because we are so focused on what we could gain in the short term rather than long-term foundations that we would be setting. This, I believe, is such a big thing because this is something that I do. I think about what I can get in my immediate moment rather than looking at the long-term foundations that I can lay. And to shift my perspective is super difficult. It takes intentionality, right? We are so focused on the short-term gain. And so I actually wrote this down as well. But when we're doing that, right, we're so focused on what we can gain right now that we don't really give any thought to the future that we can have. And so it feels like I'm sacrificing life. I'm sacrificing living in order to be wise, right? And so maybe we've heard people say this. I've heard people say this. Actually, I've said this, okay? I've got my 20s and my 30s to really live life. And after that, I will make wise decisions, right? I'm 27. I can make unwise decisions still, right? I've got 2 decades of unwise decision making, and then when I hit my 40s, that's when I'm old and I have to make wise decisions. I've insulted a lot of people. But we think this. I've had conversations with people that think this. I've thought about this. I've got my 20s and my 30s, man. right? Or maybe we've heard this. There's another version. I don't want to give up on my youth. YOLO. What a great saying. Where I can make unwise decisions, and when I get older, that's when I will have to make wise decisions, right? We've heard this. Maybe we've even said this, right? I've said this. I've heard it. I believe that all of us, make decisions based on this myth. We make decisions that offer us a moment of gain, but we don't understand that it actually sometimes compromises our future. All right? We forget that the life we are living right now is actually long-term. For some of us, we're hopefully going to live to like 70, 80 years old, maybe 90, 100. It's ridiculous. It's actually a long amount of time. And if we believe in God, if we're following Jesus, then it's life eternal, forever. Right? The life that we are living is long-term. And I think we need to shift our perspective on this to start thinking long-term. All right? So I've got a question that I want us to think about in those moments when we are challenged of, do I make an unwise decision so I can gain something right now, compromising my future, or do I make a wise decision that lays a long-term foundation? Because if we believe this myth, I think this question is actually really important to ask. And so this is what the question is. If I'm not exercising wisdom in this current moment, if I'm not exercising wisdom, what foundations am I laying down for the future? In this unwise decision, if I make it right now, how is that going to impact my long term? In the wise decision that I'm making right now, how is this going to impact my long term? When we come to moments, I really hope, and take a photo of it, write it down, ask this question, because I really, really believe that it's going to help us decide, right? And this is just not my own thinking. This is not just Jordan actually exercising wisdom, right? Because if we return back to the parable, Jesus actually speaks into this, okay? And so this is what it says. It says, as for everyone who comes to me, so he's continuing from the story, as for everyone who comes to me and hears my words and put them into practice, i.e., if everyone who hears the knowledge that I'm sharing, right, and puts it into practice, I will show you what they are like. And I love this imagery. He goes to the next slide, and he says, they are like a man building a house, right, who dug down deep and laid the foundations on rock. And so when a flood came, the torrent struck the house, but could not shake it, because it was well built. Jesus is saying, hey, if you listen to the knowledge that I'm sharing freely, if we are gaining knowledge from different people in different places, drawing from all of that, but we put it into practice, we're actually laying down a foundation for the long term. We're laying down a foundation for our house, right? And so when life comes along and it's like, right? We're safe. We're unshaken because the foundations that we've laid are strong. And then he continues and he says, but the one who hears my words and does not put them into practice is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. The moment the torrent struck that house, it collapsed and its destruction was complete. Savage Jesus, its destruction was complete. If we're making unwise decisions right now, it's not laying a foundation. If we're making unwise decisions right now, there's the likelihood that we probably won't make wise decisions later on in our future. And so the house that we're building, our lives, when life comes around and it hits us hard, it will fall. There will be destruction. This is challenging. This is really challenging. because this goes against what we want right now. And it challenges us to think about the future. It challenges us to think long term, right? The reality is such, though, all right? The reality is such is that we don't actually naturally move towards wisdom. We don't naturally move towards wisdom. We don't naturally move towards making the right decision if it means sacrificing something that I can gain right now, even if it means compromising my future, okay? But what if we could move towards wisdom with the long-term foundation mindset in mind? Setting up foundations for what our future could be or can be, right? Because I strongly believe that for the most part, we have the knowledge. We know. Or we can obtain it. We don't have to experience it. We don't have to make unwise decisions in order to make wise decisions. We can actually obtain it. We can draw from different places. We can draw from God in order to make wise decisions. We just choose not to be wise. And that's confronting. It's confronting for me, right? But for me, I would love to see us change that. I would love to see it in my own life, and I would love to see it for your life as well, right? And so I have three challenges that I think that are going to help us really, really change this perspective. And so this is the first one. This is actually a question from Andy Stanley, who's a pastor in a church, right? And this question was posed maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and I thought this was revolutionary because it forced me to think about my future. And so the question is, in light of my past experiences, okay, my current circumstances and my future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing to do? From what I've learned before, maybe experiencing it, right? If we made those unwise decisions. Or the knowledge that I'm gaining right now from all these different places, from God, from people, from all of that, from my past experiences to where I am right now, and what I hope my future can be, what is the wise thing to do? I think this is a banger of a question. I think this is brilliant. And I really, really hope that we take this in because this is brilliant, right? The second one is this. What does God say? I think this is important as well. Because one of the amazing things about God is that He values us so much that He decided to share this knowledge and share this wisdom in the form of the Bible, right? And for some of us, we're really scared of it. I'm scared of it sometimes because it's confronting. The knowledge and the wisdom that's in it is scary sometimes. But it's great. And it's free. And God freely gives it to us because He values our lives so much. And He wants us to have a valuable life. Right? So what does God say about it? And for some of us, we need to take it off our bookshelves or buy new Bibles because we've lost them. Right? Or open up our phones. Wipe the dust off. Right? And open it. If that's too scary, hey, I actually say get involved with a life group or something. With conversations with people that are exploring it and can actually give knowledge from God. If reading the Bible is too scary. What does God say? That's the second challenge. And then the third challenge is this. Oh, we've missed it, but this is the third challenge. It links up with this verse. It says, don't just know about it, put it in action. Go and do it. Right? In James, oh, there it is. In James chapter 1, verse 22, right? He is so blunt and it's so refreshing. When I read it, I was like, oh my goodness, this is so nice. Right? Do not merely listen to the word. Do not merely just know this stuff. Don't just take it in and so deceive yourself and think you're wise because of it, right? Put it into action. Do what it says. That's when I think we're exercising wisdom. And I think that's when we are actually thinking about the long-term foundations that we're setting. Wisdom, I think, is a value that needs to be reintroduced into our lives. Okay? It needs to start taking priority, and we need to start being intentional about exercising wisdom in our everyday life. Because the opportunities in our everyday are very real. Every day we have an opportunity to exercise wisdom that sets a foundation for our future, thinking long term. All right? So as Jesus followers, if you follow Jesus, this is like a mandatory kind of thing. He challenges us. We saw it in the parables, we see it in James, and in so many different other areas of the Bible, in the knowledge that he shares. He challenges us. So as Jesus followers, we need to be doing this. We need to be doing this. Let's exercise wisdom. For those that don't believe or are exploring it tenderly, I think the same thing applies. We can exercise wisdom in our everyday. Let's shift our perspective in what we can just gain right now. Let's shift our perspective in thinking that we need to be older to make wise decisions. Let's shift that perspective and see that actually in our everyday we can make wise decisions that set ourselves up for the long term, that set a foundation. And it doesn't mean that we're sacrificing life. It means that we're gaining life and gaining life in abundance, because the reality is there is a God that loves us so much. There is a God that values us and values us having an abundant life, a valuable life. And for me personally, I would love for all of us to look back on our life and go, wow, I lived a life full of value. I lived a life full of value. Dear God, thank you so much. We have a God that loves us, that we have you that loves us so much and values us so much that you want us to have a valuable life. Thank you that you are a God that shares knowledge freely, that shares wisdom freely. But thank you that you are a God that also challenges us to put that knowledge into action, to not just know about it, and so that we deceive ourselves into thinking that we are wise, but to actually go and do it, to exercise wisdom. Thank you for being an amazing God. Thank you for sending your Son to die on the cross so that we may have life. And Lord, I pray that we value that life that has been given to us by exercising wisdom in our everyday, thinking about our long term. I pray all of this in Jesus' name. Amen.